the last 20 years of building sites for selling things on the internet has been super optimized to human eyeballs. So you're talking about hero images, the vibe and branding, the video, all this stuff. Agents don't see any of that, and so what they do read is the data underneath that, and so that data being structured and having more data than less data and the right data is this new problem that brands are just not set up for. But bringing that back to your question, right? Like, where are things going? I think that it is. I There's a lot of folks down in SF, a lot of venture capitals, especially who have this belief that like we're looking at the end of sites, and I actually don't think that's the case. I actually think that sites will be more important than ever. But I think that you kind of brands are, like just like when mobile happened, it was like the brands that adopted the mobile were the ones that really thrive. And today, 80% of our partners' traffic comes through the mobile web. So like it's the same thing with AI. It's like you have to be great at both now. Like building a great site for the human to transact, because I think that'll still be the case. I don't see a world where even if we truly trust these systems, I think that there's just so much risk for the average consumer, for the who's making a decision that they want to see the product. For a lot of cases still, and that will, I think, always be the case on some level. But AI and bringing that back into their ChatGPT or Gemini or the new Siri that's supposed to have basically Gemini, but we're calling it Siri now. That console is going to be really important. So you have to kind of optimize for both and realize that it's going to be depending on the category, whether it's fashion or automotive. It where the transaction happens might shift here and there, but the ability to solve for both is going to be the thing that I think is going to distinguish the retailers that thrive in this next few years versus the ones that don't.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing Podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. I also run an agency, Did It, build a bunch of tech under an incubator, which is variousventures.com, and run a brand as well as a couple of nonprofits. Common theme is marketing. Been doing SEO for longer than Google has existed, so super excited to be chatting with Aniket, who's at Envive. So let's start with the sort of value proposition that you guys are providing to the marketplace.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you, Kevin, for having me. Envive makes storefronts self-improving. So the way that people sell things on the internet is radically changing with AI. And our goal is to create a storefront that learns from every interaction and that helps merchants sell significantly better today than they did yesterday. And even better the next day by learning from users, learning from how to merchandise the site. And the plot twist here is that the shopper, unlike the last 20 years, is increasingly not human. And so learning to be a self-improving storefront that optimizes to both human and agentic shoppers is something that we do really well. My background, I led AI shopping at Walmart. I owned the P&L there. I took that from 0 to 100 million plus in revenue and learned a lot about what it takes to make AI work at massive scale for merchants, and excited to translate those learnings into what Envive is today.
Great. So that clearly things are moving in that direction. A lot of folks are using different storefronts. Some of them are heavily using the marketplaces, the Walmarts and the Amazons of the world for FBA. But a lot of them are also on a Magento or Shopify or one of the other platforms. And did you guys build yourselves to be specific to any one of those existing platforms and somewhat agnostic to them, or did you launch platform by platform?
Yeah, today, 70% of our customers are on Shopify. We have customers on Magento, on Commerce Cloud, and so we like to be platform agnostic, and partner with merchants however they're set up.
And as far as the speed at which your system starts to augment data at the product listings level or potentially at the category level, is that based on where a higher volume site gives more learnings to the system and it changes more frequently, more quickly?
Yeah, that's a really great intuition. That's exactly right. The more traffic you have, data AI is as good as the data sets you feed it and the techniques you use. And of course, like with merchants that do a lot more traffic, the more we can learn. And that goes all the way down to the ad group level. If you have a lot more traffic for a specific campaign, the more we can learn and make better merchandising decisions that drive better revenue per visitor to back to our brand partners.
So obviously, getting AOV higher for e-commerce is key, right? And cross-merchandising things that have the highest likelihood of being added to the shopping cart is super important. But I'd imagine there are some nuances there as it relates to different audiences potentially having different likelihoods to respond to different similar products or products that work well together. Have you guys tackled that? As it relates to the bigger, more rich the data set, right? The more nuanced I would imagine the merchandising recommendations are.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great question, right? So think about AOV or basket size. The big gap and opportunity that we saw when we started Envive, with my co-founders and I started, was that there is this need for what we call an AI brain. We're engineers here, so forgive us for our naming. But what that means is that, like, imagine, one of our, we have kind of like a monopoly on cookware, right? So we partner like Green Pan, Our Place, Made In, right? Like, so if you're coming in to buy a pan, that's like a non-toxic pan, let's say, a great way to drive a better site experience that boosts AOV is to then ask the same shopper who has that in cart, like, hey, do you have a non-toxic way of storing leftovers? Because I guarantee you, all of these merchants sell a storage containers that are also non-toxic, right? And so that just enabling that level of personalization that's thoughtful in nature is what is how we've seen our partners consistently increase AOV. And that goes beyond the last 20 years where it's like everyone has that like Nosto or whatever merchant has like, hey, like other people bought this kind of thing. What really drives the better conversion is that reasoning layer. Like people want reasons to believe. So when you present it as like, hey, you already have this for this reason, here's something complementary and here's how they go together. That goes from, oh, just another product that you're giving me at checkout to like, here's a narrative I can tell my wife or my husband in terms of how this all comes together. And of course, you can sweeten the deal with certain offers and stuff. So our goal is to create this brain that's like a smart salesperson in store that's trying to be helpful and naturally drive those upsells that drive better RPV, revenue per visitor, and AOV, card attachment rate metrics.
So it sounds like it's gone beyond wisdom of the crowds, right? Because the other platforms basically said people who bought this also bought that, which is a wisdom of the crowds theory. But you're saying, okay, well, let's peel back the layers on that, right? What exactly was it about certain other products, and particularly as a new product comes in where the wisdom isn't there from the crowd, right? Because you just added a new product to the mix that dovetails perfectly with a non-toxic non-stick pan, right? Or non-Teflon non-stick pan, and is it going to be different spatulas that they just added on as SKUs, and the AI could discern that more quickly than waiting for 300 sales to occur, where people are buying the same spatulas.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, the wisdom the crowds approach works, but it requires a lot of data, right? What's really special about this is it doesn't require nearly as much data, and it also is also synergistic with you take the data of people and their shopping behavior, but you also like factor in the core value of these generative AI systems, like large language models, is reasoning. So you bring in that why, and then you combine that into a user experience, which at that point where someone is adding non-toxic cookware and you can understand the context and their intent in terms of what's driving that, you realize that this person values health and they value they typically it's moms that are buying this type of stuff, and then you can expand that out into your assortment and then offer uh, fully AI generated pages that bring forward all the social content and your product assortment to create that in real time a narrative that helps drive that upsell moment, which allows us to like go. This is like the next generation moving beyond just the wisdom of the crowds, where it's that data set, but it's supercharged with the why, and the why is what really compels us as consumers to transact.
So obviously, there are differences of opinion as to how quickly different things will become agentic as it relates to me as a buyer authorizing my agent to go out and make purchases on my behalf. Um, which of course to some extent eliminates the shopping experience, or it moves it much closer to me. I guess I make a decision very early on, and I empower an agent to act on my behalf. But many of the cross merchandising platforms, right, are relying on the fact, whether it's in Amazon's sponsored listings, which of course are huge revenue for them, but even within sites, within a Shopify site or a Magento site, the ability to cross merchandise will change dramatically if agents are talking to agents as opposed to agents or agent enabled merchandising talking to humans. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on how quickly humans will decide that they don't enjoy the shopping experience and would prefer to have the agent do a lot of it, the early heavy lifting, versus people still enjoying squeezing the cantaloupes, to use an analogy, right, from the grocery store, where you want to be engaged in that shopping experience.
Oh man, this is such a beautiful question. And, you know, just to frame this up a bit, right? Like the last 20 years of building sites for selling things on the internet has been super optimized to human eyeballs. So you're talking about hero images, the vibe and branding, the video, all this stuff. Agents don't see any of that. And so what they do read is the data underneath that. And so that data being structured and having more data than less data and the right data is this new problem that brands are just not set up for.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing that back to your question, right? Like, where are things going? I think that it is. I There's a lot of folks down in SF, a lot of venture capitals, especially who have this belief that like we're looking at the end of sites, and I actually don't think that's the case. I actually think that sites will be more important than ever. But I think that you kind of brands are, like just like when mobile happened, it was like the brands that adopted the mobile were the ones that really thrive. And today, 80% of our partners' traffic comes through mobile web. So like it's the same thing with AI. It's like you have to be great at both now. Like building a great site for the human to transact, because I think that'll still be the case. I don't see a world where even if we truly trust these systems, I think that there's just so much risk for the average consumer, for the who's making a decision, that they want to see the product. For a lot of cases still, and that will, I think, always be the case on some level. But AI and bringing that back into their ChatGPT or Gemini or the new Siri that's supposed to have basically Gemini, but we're calling it Siri now. That console is going to be really important. So you have to kind of optimize for both and realize that it's going to be depending on the category, whether it's fashion or automotive. Where the transaction happens might shift here and there, but the ability to solve for both is going to be the thing that I think is going to distinguish the retailers that thrive in this next few years versus the ones that don't.
So I guess merchandising isn't dead yet for sure. And I think to your point about delighting the consumers when they're in a shopping experience, regardless of whether they happen to be on a site or one layer removed from a site, either agentically or could be a marketplace that allows for checkout. It sounds like in the end, the consumer's desires need to come first and foremost. Foremost.
Yeah, 100%. Like especially for, Spanx is one of our partners, and they're charging like $140 for leggings, right? Like when you're at those price points where your AOV is north of $75 for the average consumer, becomes a considered purchase where that emotional connection really, really matters. And so you kind of need to think as a marketer from the perspective of like agents. It's a one-two punch of agents matter because people are using, the amount of traffic for retailers from ChatGPT. I think that the stat is like Q1 of 2026 saw a 400% increase in AI referred traffic. It's still a relatively small percentage of the pie but it's exponentially growing. So you still have to solve for that, but you also need to solve for the fact that, like, in the end of the day, you're solving for a person, and that's about a narrative, and all those same things that matter for human eyeballs still matter quite a lot. It's just that the way that those eyeballs are coming to your site involves this AI real estate agent or broker. I think it is a broker that's involved in this situation.
Yeah, I think without going too deep down the rabbit hole from an engineering perspective, I think a lot of marketers and brand owners that are either selling on their own sites or selling on a third-party marketplace, they understand sort of data schemas, and they understand all the descriptors of the products that they have, but they may not understand the nuance of vectorization, right? And this idea that, all everything that describes your product is going to be now in a vector database that allows for adjacencies to be calculated in very different ways. So what should brand owners think about as they think about, how should I make sure that my brand and my products and my SKU diversity are properly represented in the platforms that I'm deploying them on?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So let's work backwards from, I think marketers' dream outcome is to be ranked number one across every answer engine, right? Like that's where we all want to be. And I think that there's four levers towards getting there, which in no particular order, because it depends on the brand and the vertical, and a bunch of other stuff. But like there's, I think, ultimately your own platform. There's Reddit, there's like YouTube, and then there's publisher networks. And then of those, the ones you can actually practically control are going to be like is going to be like your own platform, where I think that really focusing on, I think the insight that matters is that SEO, there's like a few words per query, but here you're looking at, 30, like massive increase in the amount of words that go into the average query, and also refinement queries, right? For which is very different from SEO. So that means that the long tail matters a lot. And a lot of that has to do with taking first party data and then creating a lot of content that is robot friendly, to really speak to all the different use cases. So, pick on like, there's this a brand Armra that does like cholesterol, like I think it's like a gut health type thing, and they're running a bunch of meta ads for the biohacker persona, the athletic persona, the like the new mom persona, and I think that. But when you go to their site, and this is not me picking on them, it's just an observation I had from talking to a partner this morning. Is just they're optimizing to one of those when what you need to be doing is really creating long tail content that works for all of those, because that's what the robots are looking for. To your point about vectorization, is that they ultimately all that data is going to be mathematically represented. So when they well, you said don't not get into engineering, but here we are. And when at point of inference, right? When the consumer is looking for something, you want to make sure that every single combinatorial variant of how a consumer could be searching for something is stored, to solve for being ranked higher there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that for somebody who's been involved in SEO for over 30 years, content is back and it's king. But I think the extra layer is the fact that user generated content and its authenticity is starting to matter more than ever. I mean, one of the reasons that for many brands Reddit is important is because it's pretty good at fighting spam, although there's certainly spam and black hat within Reddit. But this idea that human generated content and the diversity of opinion and the diversity of rich information that's packed into UGC in its natural form, right, really lends itself to this process of improving probabilistic visibility. And that could be probabilistic visibility within a site or outside the site, right? I mean,
Mhm.
as Amazon's internal search engine gets better and better, it will probably start to rely more and more on vectorized data, to the extent that it doesn't already. And, certainly ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all are, the more intelligent that they can be is the better data they've got. So bad data in, bad data out, and good data in, better results out.
Yes. Ultimately, AI is as good as the data sets you feed it. And it's like to your point, like it's really interesting. Just that point on Reddit, one of our newest partners is the largest fly fishing brand in the world. And their challenge is that like they really want better discoverability through ChatGPT, but Reddit is actually such a not great place for fly fishing information, apparently, because the right anglers are not on Reddit. They're too like they're out there they're out there on the river. You know what I'm saying? So it's interesting where when these because ultimately I think everything on the internet converges towards truth, but we're in this really funny era where we don't really have like consistency in being able to ultimately source the right UGC. And I think that's one of the big things that these AI things systems are trying to figure out is like, how do I figure out what's true? And it's really hard to know, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the engineers who are at the AIs are, to the extent that they're different than the Google engineers were during Google's move towards RankBrain. and towards some of the more sophisticated ranking algorithms, right? They're having to figure out how to remove or come up with a single source of truth. I mean, you ask enough people, what is ivermectin good for, right? You're going to get a lot of
Hmm.
opinions as to what is actually truth. Well, opinions differ, right? So this is not an easy task for the engineers in many cases to determine sort of what is true, right, for the purposes of delighting the consumer.
Yeah, truth is very complicated. That's a really good point, because it's going to be really interesting. I think that what I tell our brand partners all the time is that creating your own systems of first party data creation and UGC is like, I think, I can't stress how important that is, because ultimately, if you can put that on your own platforms, that will get used and discovered. And so I think that that's where basically owning your own process, people run your product, so you should be able to really focus on getting their experiences in front of your own new prospects that you're driving to the site.
Yeah. So, what should marketers be thinking about? Ones who own their own e-commerce instance and are sort of trying to, improve the consumer experience simultaneously with improving the experience of, I guess, the agentic experience. In other words, getting the right data out into the broader ecosystem um, for out external visibility.
Yeah, yeah. So just to play that question back to you, because there's a few ways I could take it. It's, what would I advise marketers to help them achieve their goals from like a discoverability perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the discoverability is a great term for it, right? Because it used to be a Google SERP was discoverability, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
social became an entirely separate area where some people never left social and they discovered within social, like, search within TikTok, search within different social platforms. And so, each of those discoverable aha moments is a little bit different. And now you've got an entire overlay for everything that was crawlable, which is making its way into the LLMs, right? So I don't think the marketers have fully wrapped their heads around the idea of probabilistic visibility. They're used to sort of fairly simple to read positional reports, right? For this keyword, I typically show up here, right? There may be some personalization involved. But when you're starting to talk about context, right, and the level to which context influences the result, uh, even a lot of these platforms that hypothetically show you probabilistic rank change over time, they're not taking context and subsequent queries or query refinement into account, right? So it's not an easy it's not an easy answer, right? The data GEO teams and I have a lot of fun conversations around that. You know, where we've arrived is understanding which things correlate highly with improved relevance that you probably should be doing anyway are the ones you should focus on, right? So if you should have been active in Reddit and your competitor's active in Reddit and you're not, you probably should do it even if there's no such thing as an LLM, right? If you should have been producing YouTube videos and all your competitors are producing more than you on a monthly basis, you should probably be doing more videos, right? The drawing the direct line, right, between what volume of increased output of certain types of content will definitively result in improved GEO rank is very difficult, right? However, as long as you could sort of say to your CFO or CMO, well, we noticed everyone who's succeeding is doing these things, and there's good reasons to do them anyway, we should probably do those.
Yeah. It's basically, it's honestly, it's interesting because I'm curious for if your take on this, given your decades of experience of in the SEO and now GEO space. Like, the I feel like in 2005 or even 2015, you could basically hire this like SEO person and basically then print money for the next few years to a decade, because that was like that worked, and there was a lot of optimizations that worked. But now it's like you can't keyword stuff or a reasoning model, right? Like, you now you're talking about an answer, and you can't really sweet talk that. Uh, Sweet talk meaning like kind of referring to the bundle of tricks that work for SEO. You kind of have to be the right answer, and you have to prove that with data. And so it becomes kind of like my mental model for this for marketers is that like you kind of have to approach this like I have two, but what is this like a real estate transaction now where you have your own agent, which is negotiating with basically a super agent from the consumer perspective, or it's like you're going to court and you have to really have your you have to imbue your uh, all the intelligence about your products and all the different scenarios that someone could shop with it, and the data around that. Which honestly, the interesting thing is that most of the time retailers are sitting on this. The GEO teams that, and I'm curious if this kind of tracks with the way your conversations are just stuck on this place between like looking at all the stuff that's within their CRMs and all these other systems, and then compiling that into things that are production ready and surfaced in ways that can be vectorized appropriately. And that seems to be the current set of obstacles that teams are navigating through. And once they do that, I think that there'll be a new set of challenges because this is like a forever game. This is never over. But that seems to be the immediate challenge to work through.
I think certainly from a foundational perspective, surfacing all the great content and all the nuance of that content that is known by the retailer or known by the brand is absolutely table stakes. Right? I think where it becomes more interesting is the earlier analogies that you used, which really to me boil into an interesting form of meritocracy. Right? SEO evolved into more of a meritocracy. If you didn't deserve to rank and you used gray hat or black hat, it usually wouldn't last, right? Because the meritocracy portions of the algorithm would eventually put you where you belonged. Could you game the system? Depending on which year you were talking about and which types of sites you were talking about, there were opportunities to sort of bend the rules or break the rules and get away with it, right? But increasingly, it was sort of like speeding on the highway, right? The more you speed, the greater the chances of getting caught and the greater the penalties when you're caught, right? So it's probably not a good idea to go more than 10 miles over the speed limit, right? And so now we're in this situation where this meritocracy is judged not just by everything that could be ingested, but there's a feedback loop involved in it, right? So if your product and or service is sucky at something or doesn't meet expectations in some way, the negative will feed into the engine as well, right? As people post on Reddit, as people complain on complaint boards, as people post on social media with a negative context or a negative story, right? So it truly becomes a meritocracy in both directions, right? You need to, as a product, this experiential branding touch point ends up being a data point that makes its way back into the LLMs, right? And so you can't, like, no amount of advertising, no amount of budget can overcome the crappy product, right? In the long term, in the short to intermediate term, and in certain niches and certain long tail environments, potentially yes. But all those systems are gravitating towards feedback loops that really reward the best, and not just the best at marketing and advertising and content creation and PR and community, right? But then they have to fulfill on the brand promise as well. And there's the risk that, like, and that doesn't sit in marketing. That sits in product. That sits in customer support, right? That sits in completely different silos than the CMO is typically directly overseeing, right? So the CMO, he or she, needs to be liaising with departments that previously were not part of their day to day.
Yeah, there's so much insight in what you just said. Is the idea that AI is enabling a meritocracy on both directions. It aligns this idea that the internet is converging towards truth faster than ever, which is really great news for companies that build great products. And what is a great product is actually really interesting because oftentimes, especially in the D2C space, a great product and great marketing are kind of the same thing. There's a company that in the supplement space that is like athletic greens as a gummy, right? But and there's a number of companies like that, but they do a great job of having a differentiated brand narrative that resonates with consumers and that allows them to to become kind of like the go-to. And maybe the insight there is like you kind of need to own your category and be the category king in your specific category. And there's always creative ways to pivot into a new category. And maybe that's and that plus like doing the basics of building a great brand and doing the things that have always worked for SEO over time can create like the level of separation that allows your company to consistently be ranked at the top.
Yeah, I think redefining the level of niche of your category is part of that, right? So boiling the ocean takes a lot of energy, and the more narrowly you define a specific audience, the more you can delight that audience with your product and or your service, the more likely you are to end up with the kind of information feedback into the LLMs that will, reinforce your, your marketing within that niche. So yeah, I think that many marketers will probably have to reevaluate using B2B language, ICP, or your target audience in B2C language, right? Maybe reevaluate that. Maybe look more carefully at personas to the extent that helps you narrow, right? Not just psychographics and demographics, but also personas. And then whatever other ways you can slice and dice those individuals to look for commonalities will be helpful, right? As you think about the algorithmic implications of that from your product as well, right? Looking at the algorithmic implications of different types of consumers coming in through the same front door, but not necessarily wearing a hat that says I'm the soccer mom or I'm the busy dad.
Listen, I think agents reward provable truth and performance. And if you can, but the question is, was you get into your point at the persona level, what that is, and you start to learn that, and then you start to take those learnings and feed them into whether it's UCP for Gemini, these different protocols that inform ranking. I mean, the future is also, I think, like multi-agent is kind of the new multi-channel. You kind of have to optimize to the nuances of like talking to Gemini versus talking to ChatGPT. But as long as you do that, then you start having this like new feedback loop that speaks the language of agents to create that like lasting value that marketers are looking for.
For sure. So we've covered a lot of great ground. Any final thoughts as it relates to the direct-to-consumer marketer and things that they should be planning for over the next year?
Oh man, if I had to recap or offer me some parting guidance in terms of what I'm seeing the folks that are getting the best results do, it's like it really comes back to the final point you made about understanding if you have a product that has different personas and use cases. I go back to Armra with their one powder, one product, one SKU, but 6 different personas and different narratives and stories. Being able to make sure that the LLM understands that and has provable results, right? LLMs will reward truth and performance, and being able to speak that in the language of the LLM will materially help, especially in these early innings where most people really aren't optimizing because everyone's kind of like confused and stuck. I think that's where there's an opportunity to really be the first mover that can therefore reap the benefits of that early investment.
For sure. Well, I appreciate you joining me, Aniket, and sharing your wisdom with viewers and listeners. Thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it for having me on.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.